Hey everyone, welcome back to my VLSI diary. My name is Shivangi Upadhyay, and in today's video, we are going to talk about a very important concept in digital design, which is propagation delay. Now, honestly, when I first came across the term during my learning phase, it sounds very theoretical. But when I started learning and working on real designs, I realized how critical it actually is. So, what exactly is propagation delay? In simple words, whenever we give an input to any digital circuits, like a NOT gate, AND gate, or even a flip-flop, the output doesn't change instantly. There is always a small delay between the input change and the output responses. And this tiny delay is what we call a propagation delay. Now, you might think, okay, it's just a small delay, so why does it matter? But in real VLSI system, where millions of transistors are switching at very high speeds, even a tiny delay can impact the overall timing performances and reliability of the circuit. That's why understanding propagation delay becomes very important, especially when you are working on timing analysis, setup and hold time, or designing high speed digital systems. In this video, I will break this concept down in a very simple and practical way using diagrams, examples, and clear explanations so that even if you are a beginner or you can easily understand it. So, let's start this journey and understand the propagation delay step by step. Have you ever noticed, even in digital circuits, nothing happens instantly? You give an input, but the output takes a tiny amount of time to respond. That tiny delay is called a propagation delay. Propagation delay is simply the time taken for a signal to travel from the input to the output of the circuit. In other words, when you change the input, the output does not change immediately. Even though we call it digital, internally the circuit needs a little time to react. Let's understand this with a simple NOT gate. Suppose input changes from 0 to 1, the output should ideally change from 1 to 0. But this change is not instantaneous. There is a small delay between input change and the output response. That delay is what we call TPD, a propagation delay. This delay occurs in every digital logic gates, whether it's AND or not, even complex circuits. Nothing in hardware is instant. Now, this is very important for interviews, like propagation delay is measured from it's 50% of the input transition to 15% of the output transition. Not from 0 to 1, but from the midpoint to the midpoint. So, whenever you see a signal changing, remember there is always a small delay between input and output, and that is the propagation delay. Now that we understand what propagation delay is, let's see how it actually happens inside a circuit. To understand this clearly, let's take the simplest possible example of a NOT gate. Look at the input signal here. Initially, the input is 0 and then it changes to 1. Since this is a NOT gate, the output should ideally changes from 1 to 0. But here's the important part. The output does not change instantly. There is a small time gap between the input change and the output response. This small delay is called a propagation delay, denoted as TPD. Why does this happen? Because transistors inside the gate take time to switch, internal capacitance need to charge and discharge, signals physically travels through the circuit. So even in digital systems, there is always a delay. Now, if you observe the waveform carefully, the input changes first and only after a small delay the output follows. The gap between them is exactly what we measured as TPD. Input changes first, output reacts later, and that difference in time is propagation delay. So Whenever you see a logic gate, always remember output never changes instantly. So, from the NOT gate example, we observed something very important. First key observation is digital circuits are not instantaneous. Even though we work with zeros and ones, internally the circuit is made of transistors and these transistors take time to switch. So, output can never change immediately after input. Second important observation is every logic gate introduces delay. Look at the chain of gates. First gate, then a small delay. Second gate, then another delay. Third gate, then more delay. These delay keep adding up. So, if your signal passes through multiple gates, total delay becomes larger and larger. This is exactly why processors have speed limits. Timing analysis is required. We care about delay in VLSI design. Every gate adds delay and delays always accumulate. So the takeaway is simple. No digital circuit is instant and every logic gate contributes to delay. Now comes the most important part of this topic. This is something that is very frequently asked in interviews. Propagation delay is not measured randomly. It is measured in a very specific and standard way. Propagation delay or TPD is measured from 50% of the input transition to 50% of the output transition. Many beginners think that it is measured from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, but that is not correct. We use the 50% point because signal transitions are not perfectly sharp. They rise and fall gradually. 50% represents the midpoint of switching. So it gives a consistent and accurate measurement. Let's look at the waveform. The blue part is the input signal rising from 0 to 1, and the yellow part is the output signal changing after some delay. The time difference between these two 50% point is the propagation delay or TPD. Not from start to start, not from end to end, always from midpoint to midpoint. If you say this clearly in an interview, you immediately show strong fundamental in timing analysis. So remember, propagation delay is always measured from 50% of the input to the 50% of the output. I hope this concept is now very clear to you. If you found this video very helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe and share my channel with your friends who are preparing for VLSI interviews. Thank you for watching.